booktube! So the other day I was chatting with my boyfriend and showing him this super exciting new reading chart that I'm going to be using to keep track of all my bookish stuff this year. It was created by Brock over at Let's Read. I'll leave the link to his video describing it where you can download it down below in case you're interested in checking it out. But anyway, I was showing it to him and I was getting all pumped because I'm really bad at organizing statistical things about what I'm reading, and I always have to like go back at the end of the year and figure it all out like hurriedly before my wrap up. And so I was like super pumped to finally have something more organized that I could use easily and like didn't have to come up with it myself. And so I was showing him all the categories that I could use, like, oh, obviously there's like the title and the author, but then you can keep track of the gender and the country. Oh, I mean the gender of the author. And he just kind of looked at me with this look of like, why would that matter? Like, he was really confused. And at first I was confused that he was confused, but then I've been thinking about it more because, you know, a lot of people when they approach reading, and I used to approach reading this way, it's such a personal thing. Like, reading time is supposed to be a time for enjoyment, and so the only thing that should really matter about a book is the quality of the content, and so nothing else should really matter. And since the gender of the author isn't going to affect the quality, then why would you want to keep track of that? Like, what is that going to tell you? And so I was interested in sort of expanding on sort of why I consider it valuable to keep track of that, because I totally get that line of reasoning of like, well, why would you care about knowing other things about the author when the only thing that matters about the book is whether it's good? And I guess I just don't think that that's the only thing I look for anymore. And so I figured I would have a little discussion with you guys, sort of expanding on my thoughts about this, because I think a lot of people have very different opinions on this, and we've kind of talked about it in terms of like, why is reading diversity more important on booktube? I guess I just wanted to, it's been mulling around in my mind for a while, and so I wanted to kind of chat about my sort of more long-winded answer to this question of like, why do I care about keeping track of things like the gender of an author or the nationality of an author, etc. I guess one of the biggest reasons I care about keeping track of this is simply because at the moment, like 99% of the books that I'm reading are books that I've also purchased, and so if I'm only reading the same types of authors, or if I'm like reading lots of different types of authors, that's directly reflective of what I've also been purchasing, and so that means it's directly reflective of who I am supporting with my actual dollar bills, you know what I mean? And so like with any other product, I kind of now do care like where that money is going and who I am supporting, or you know, how can I make that so that aligns with the things that I care about. And so it's just kind of like with any other product, right? Like if you're somebody who cares about buying local versus buying like the brand name things, then you're gonna want to know where that stuff came from, and you're gonna want to know if something is local, because then that means that you're gonna make a more informed choice of, okay, I have these two products, one of them is local, one of them's not. I've decided I want to choose the local one over the other options, right? It's kind of the same thing with books. For example, I love fantasy and sci-fi books, and those genres are typically dominated by male authors. So let's say that I wanted to go out of my way to support more female authors in those genres. One way of doing that, of course, is buying their books, right? So if I decide that that's something that's important to me, then I'm going to prioritize that, and then that's where my money is going, and then I feel good about that, and I also get to read a great book that happens to be by a female author. And so I guess one reason why it matters, if I keep track of it, then I can adjust accordingly so that I'm buying in terms of what I'm supporting. You know, it's just like with any product, right? But let's say that you don't care about any of that, about any of the sort of context around a book or in the publishing industry and where your money is going. Then would it still matter for you to keep track of things about the author, like their gender or their ethnicity or their nationality, etc.? I think it'd still be really interesting and useful, because here's the thing. Your books don't come out of the void, you guys. Like, we all know that. The books that you're reading, every single word that ever appears in front of your face originally came from the mind of a person, right? So if you are reading the same types of books all the time and you're getting bored with that and you want more variation, then the easiest way to do that is to read more types of authors, because obviously, like, if you're only reading from sort of one category, there's still going to be a ton of variation because every single human is different. But it also makes sense to say that, like, okay, if I have two books that I pick up out of a pile and both of them are by white male authors from the US in their mid-30s, I don't know, there's still going to be a ton of variation between those two books. Like, those are not going to be the same book just because it was similar demographic person that wrote them. But it makes sense to say that there's going to be a lot more variation between this white US 35-year-old dude and, I don't know, like a black woman from South Africa who is in her late 60s. there's going to be a lot more variation between different types of people than there is going to be within sort of one demographic category, simply because the cultures we come from, your background, your class, gender, and your sexual orientation, every single type of thing that shapes you as a person are going to shape you as a human, and then those are going to shape your thoughts, and then those are going to make their way onto the page. Maybe not every single aspect of your life and your ideologies are going to make it into your book every single time, but they're always going to affect your writing. Even if it doesn't affect the quality, it still affects what's actually in the book. So why does it make sense to keep track of things about the author? Well, because then you have a better idea of why you tend to see certain types of protagonists, or why you tend to see certain tropes appear more often. The more that you branch out into authors of other places and of other walks of life, the more variation you're going to see. And so it's just going to be useful for you to kind of track where those differences are coming from, because you just can't see that from only looking at the genre of a book or the page length of a book or the format of a book. Those are things that come from a person, from the author who wrote it. Being able to kind of figure out where those differences are coming from, I just personally think is useful. Plus, in general, the more you're sort of aware of the types of people that you're reading, the more easy it is to like figure out exactly where you need to branch out if you want to branch out. And I personally think that it's important to do that. The more exposure you have to a wider variety of viewpoints, the more interesting your life is, the more interesting your reading life is, the more exposure you have to different things, the more informed you're going to be about those things, and the more you're going to be able to empathize with different people, right? So I just think there's a lot of benefits. So why do I keep track? I just think that it's particularly useful to figure out what's going into that book that you're reading, because the person that wrote it is always going to be in there. So yeah, anyways, those are sort of my rambling thoughts about why I think it's important to keep track personally of these different things about an author. But definitely let me know what your thoughts are on all of these sorts of topics down in the comments below. Is keeping track of these types of things about an author important to you? Is it not? Why? And are there other things or other thoughts you have related to this type of stuff that you want to share? Let me know. Hopefully this hasn't been too rambly and it made some sense, but yeah, those were just kind of my thoughts. So this has been a discussion video. My name is Jackie, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.